Aligning AI to human preferences is not a sustainable idea because our preferences change all the time. In this talk, our guest, Joel Leibo from Google DeepMind, introduces a new approach to AI and human coexistence that takes into account conflict theory and how different we all are. I'm not sure all people who are on this call read the paper, just to help us diving into your philosophy of alignment. What are you suggesting in this paper?
It's interesting to call it an alignment framework. I mean, I don't really use the word alignment very much. We use it often when we talk about the alignment community as a set of people who use the word alignment, but we don't tend to use it ourselves. What the paper is really about is pragmatism. We are talking about a view where we're trying to reason from the actual to the theoretical rather than the other way around. The main the implications of that are that we want to be able to start from different starting points for different reasoning questions, different questions that we're asking about. We can start in different places. We don't have to have a single set of axioms that we always start from and always use. We don't have to believe that there's one right way of reasoning that you always will get to if you start in the right place. There could just be different ways of reasoning and different places that people end up. And then a picture of society where there is irreducible disagreement because people have different starting places and different ways of reasoning. So what that suggests is that what's really important is whatever it is that holds society together. So the basic assumption now is one where people actually just disagree with each other in society, but it's like a multicultural society that hangs together for some reason. So the question is, why does it hang together? And let's make sure that whatever that is, it remains healthy. And so we say that there are different conflict resolution mechanisms or conflict mitigation mechanisms. It highlights that the health of those mechanisms is what's most important for maintaining stability of society, and collective flourishing is the word that we use. So you could see it as a picture where we're primarily interested in trying to prevent violent conflict or prevent. We want there to be a space for disagreement that doesn't spiral into violence and pull society apart. And I think this is partially interesting because it's in contrast to another major thing that people say, which is very common in the alignment community, is a society could be defined instead as a group of people that all have some kind of shared objective. And that's what you're sort of implicitly doing whenever you're saying something if you take a utilitarian perspective where you want to maximize the sum of everyone's utilities, that's like saying there's one kind of goal, which is being defined by that utility, and it's the collective one. That's the collective goal. Or if you talk about reducing suffering as being the objective, anything like that is saying that there's a single goal that's binding a society together. We're saying let's not assume that there's anything like that. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but we're not going to assume it. What we're going to have as the basic picture is one where there is irreducible conflict between parts of society, and then something that is keeping it together, and then talking about the health of that thing.
Have different views. We might have conflict situations, but we still find ways to coexist because we somehow have to coexist, right? And
we have to live together. I mean, that's the core question. You have to find ways to live together. That's the core bit.
And that's why we developed some sort of legislation, right, to keep people accountable if they're violating some those norms. We have institutions, sort of bureaucracy, right? And those that's kind of glue that sort of allows us coexist even though we're very different and we might even hate each other. And can you please elaborate on how the appropriateness framework sort of fits in this philosophy?
The appropriateness framework is a kind of more technical theoretical thing that basically says that, right? It's we talk about appropriateness as being this kind of conflict mitigation mechanism, and it has different flavors, right? There's implicit norms and there are explicit norms. It's a big part of it. And the explicit norms you should think of as laws. And so there are judicial decisions, and there are parliaments passing laws, and Congress passes laws, and these affect how people cooperate with each other. And they don't just affect they affect kind of winners and losers for everything, right? There would be any change that happens will have the people that want that change, the people that don't want that change. When you highlight it that way, it's it shows that what's really important is not just making sure that you have the greatest good for the greatest number, but also making sure that it's not so bad for anyone that loses out that they lose trust in the system as a whole. The implicit norm part is trying to talk about more the kind of tacit sense of what is normative in a conversation or in interpersonal relations or things like that. So like how close do you stand to someone when you talk to them? Like there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and it varies by culture and varies by context and everything. So it has all the properties of a norm, but it's not something you can like articulate like a law.
In the paper, like context appropriate behavior, right? So can you, in terms of like AI, like I understand like how this works like with humans, but like when we talk about humans and AI, how this appropriateness framework and like context appropriate behavior would work? Like, can you help us sort of visualize, like give maybe some examples so we understand, okay, how it might work?
The question is what does AI change, right? We already live in a world where we use a lot of technology, and we care about the appropriateness of our interactions and the people that we meet and ourselves, and also political figures. We have opinions about that, right? We are already living in a world like that, and the question is, what will AI change about it, right? So we can extrapolate from the actual to the theoretical in that direction I've been saying, and say, okay, we expect intensification of trends that we have, right? We might be worried about polarization, and then hope we could find ways to mitigate it. I think that's kind of the picture that I sort of have in mind. It's an intensification of trends, which are not great trends at the moment.
With AI becoming more autonomous and making autonomous decisions, how we can like establish that context appropriate relationships. If developer of AI, even at this point, they don't have much control. Like we see like some weird behavior in LLMs. LLMs not equal to AI, right? Like AI will be like, with more autonomy, it will be like way beyond just LLMs. Then that norm, how that norm you envision like establishing, is it also will be happening through developers of those AI systems? How?
It sort of doesn't matter, right? I mean, the one question is like, where does the kind of motivational agency start in these systems, right? Someone can decide, I'm going to spread a bunch of misinformation on a particular topic because I have some agenda or something. That will have an effect. And it doesn't so much matter if it's a person behind the AI that makes that happen, or if it's an AI that decides to do it. It's kind of irrelevant, right? We need to have institutions that are robust to that. It's a picture where we actually expect all bad motivations are out there. We are the system as a whole needs to be robust to that.
When you say institutions, so basically you see that there should be like dedicated institutions that regulate those relationships and establish the norms.
There's an ecosystem of things, right? There are companies, there are governments, there are developers, there are open source projects. When I say institutions, I mean kind of a very broad thing that would include kind of collections of norms, both explicit and implicit, and usually some addressing to it and some ability to change it, right? Maybe some rules that are like meta norms that can change it, or secondary rules that can be used to determine what the rules are, right? These sort of things. And then also you need to have like healthy ways to change them as the situations change, right? So we talk a lot about polycentric governance in the paper, which is this concept which comes from the ways of thinking about institutions associated with a person named Elinor Ostrom. And I'll just say a few words about her for a second. But so she was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics in, I think, 2010, 2013, something like that. So she's mainly known for working on common pool resources. So this is like forests and fisheries and pastures and irrigation systems and anything where there's a resource which is kind of accessible to lots of people, and it can also be depleted through use. So these are the kind of situations where there's some sustainability challenge and where governance has something to do, right? Because what you need to do there, if you're governing this kind of resources, you need to make rules for how much you can use and when you can use it and what technologies you can use, and also for kind of monitoring that that's being followed and then sanctioning violators of that. So my work is really coming from thinking about that, right? We were very interested in that for many years, in using it to model, modeling those kind of situations in lots of different ways. Anyway, one thing that comes out of her work is this idea of polycentric governance as being useful, which is a big part of that is about having lots of different kinds of governing agencies with different remits, like different like overlapping jurisdictions, is being helpful. And you can kind of get something useful out of that complexity itself, right? you can have, like, so it's imagine like there's like state governments and federal governments, and then there's companies that are releasing AI systems, and then there's individuals that are making choices. And so in this appropriateness framework, what's also important is that there's an idea that lots of different contexts, different things are appropriate in different contexts, right? You might have a like comedy writing app or something that has, certain things make sense in stand-up comedy. Then you have like apps that are for, I don't know, like corporate tech support or something like that. Different things are appropriate. You want to make sure that there's some appropriates of governance as well. And having this more polycentric picture can be helpful for kind of making sure that legitimate authority gets pushed to all the right places at the right levels. So it needs to be kind of dynamic and able to move around as the situation is changing. That's the kind of overall picture we have in mind.
To bring this into like practical space, like to like start like moving things, like what should happen?
Right. So people will say, I think it's terrible, AI shouldn't be able to say, it depends who says that and how much power they have. The base model developer does that, then they can just say, okay, the model can never say that thing, and they can push it out to anyone who's using that base model. Now, maybe you'd say that there's some regulation on the base model developer because there's competing base model developers, right? And people, if it's really, if that's breaking things for users and users notice that, then they might switch to a different base model. But then it also, what if like the government of a country that contains a bunch of base model developers makes a rule like that? Then they could say that all of them have to do that, and then it's harder to, it's a different picture. You could also have different, have users that say, okay, I want in my local community, in my town, or maybe a better way to think of it is like in my club that I'm in, like I'm in a particular club, or like a church group or something is maybe the best way to think about it, like a religious group that has a particular thing that they want the model to say or not say. They could say, okay, for us, we're going to use it here in this way. We're going to set this rule for how it works. So we'd like to have something that's customizable for us to make sure that our children never see a model that ever says X. And that's the picture we have in mind.
But basically, every local community can customize their AI according to their traditions.
Yep, and it could be communities, or it could be like app developers for different purposes. With this idea that these can kind of grow to the right level of regulation.
But then, like, we need opt-in of developers, AI developers, right, to do these modifications to their AI systems.
Well, or you make it easy. You could make it easy to. There could be some API that makes it possible. Or
to make this happen on a practical level, you need buy-in of several stakeholders. Like who should be like on this, like developers of AI systems, right? Like what government?
Mm-hmm.
What are the stakeholders?
It's useful to see it in multiple levels, right? There are kind of there are users, and then there are developers, and then there are people making rules for what the developers can do, who are sort of making rules for what the users can do. People making rules for those who are making rules for those who are making rules. That's the way to see it. And then there's both the kind of rule making part, and then the more tacit norm evolution, are the implicit norms, in the way I talked about.
So we're talking a little bit on the theoretical end, and it seems like this paper is proposing a governance framework that wants to bring in more cooperation. I worry that people might not, like the general public, might not be able to understand very much like what we're trying to do here. How would you go about communicating with people from the general public about AI systems and governance?
Well, a question about communicating with people in the general public about these ideas, I would see it as easier than communicating about other things in the AI alignment landscape. I mean, here we're talking about a picture that is reasoning from the actual to the theoretical, where the actual is whatever's happening right now, and saying, we want to make evolutionary changes to it, like evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Like we say, we want to make this tweak to this rule so that hopefully going to get less polarization over here. Like that type of more pragmatic and evolutionary rules changes is what we're talking about. So it's kind of, I think, an easier ask for what is actually being, what you want to convince people of here, rather than something very radical, which is all over the place in this community. Right?
I do agree with the notion that we need to get our alignment inputs, our values, kind of from a very general base that includes the general public. And I think that's the direction of the utility engineering paper that the Center of Safety brought out earlier this year as well. So they want to collect those preferences and then put those into the systems, and they have a utility analysis backing that up, how to then maybe implement or check that. the concern that I see currently is that even if we manage to bring preferences into models, the models themselves in the current architectures, deep learning neural networks, they may not be fully robust. And that doesn't only go towards jailbreaking, but also towards personas that are trained by reinforcement learning, like the helpful assistant.
I actually don't think that the right thing to do is to have some kind of automatic process that gathers all the preferences and puts them into the models. I think the picture I have in mind is more like you have different developers who have their own set of users for their own purpose, right? They're maybe customizing a base model or something like that, right? They're like maybe not making a base model, but they're like putting in a system prompt and doing like their own RLHF for their own users. They also know more like what their product is meant to be, right? Because it's not just like if you ask users abstractly, what should a language model do, is very different from like, okay, I'm making a product for like a comedy writing assistant, and I know this type of it's going to operate in San Francisco, so the kinds of things that people in San Francisco think are appropriate are in bounds, and the kinds of things that people in San Francisco think are inappropriate are out of bounds, right? The developer knows that better than kind of abstractly asking users about things without context of like, oh, it's going to be a comedy writing app.
I agree to that. There's definitely multiple approaches, and that's also, I think, the approach of the democratizing AI, where more or less almost everybody could have their own personal AI that is, representative of them.
What's cool here is it's not necessarily about the personal. So the personal is also cool, but the picture here is more about community or apps, right? Where it's like you have a group that can say, this is what our group does. You might even have, depending on what kind of community is, some authority structure within it, right? Like let's imagine like a religious group or something like that, which is, or like a school or something, like a school that has the teachers make the rules and the children have to follow the rules in the school, right? Or a religious group would have some authority structure as well, right? And that could be legitimate, or at least within the context of that group, people see that as fine. And also in the context of a multicultural society, even if whatever we think of it, maybe we have a different religion or a different way of thinking, we still see it as part of civil society, so it should be allowed within a community like that.
Right,
and then
right.
Also they kind of even intersect with each other, and there's that sort of thing is what gets endlessly negotiated, and that's what a lot of governance is about. It's not that all kind of even coercive connections between communities is out of bounds, right? We do sort of allow a lot of it, and that's what governance is for. And that's why the health of the conflict resolution mechanisms is so important.
I don't want to take too much time. I think the input is definitely supportable. Like I fully agree to that. We need to make these community rules accessible to the AIs, and maybe they learn about it. Maybe like Jeff Kloon does it with this continuous learning, not even RLHF. But I think the unsolved problem for me is a little bit that those preferences may be fragile. So even if we can communicate those to the AI might not be good at executing it consistently, and may lead to failures that may be unsustainable for society. But I'll leave that at this point. Thank you for taking the question.
Basically, like ongoing research problem, right? How to make, and it's actually to your point, Martin. I was also thinking, like, what about deception, right? If let's say AI system agrees to follow community rules, but develops its own agenda, right, and just pretend that it follows, but then like sort of under the hood execute its own agenda, like how we can, minimize this kind of risks.
How effective is it to get preferences in? Like, let's say you're this, comedy writing assistant app developer, and you want to get the preferences of your, what you think is your user base into the system. Let's say it doesn't work and it makes a mistake. It says something that everyone thinks is inappropriate and appalling and whatever. Well, if you're the comedy writing app developer and you kind of know your users and you're trusted by them in that community, maybe you're a comedian yourself, then that will go one way, versus if you're some like faceless corporation far away, in a different city that has, where people are different things are appropriate, and maybe the errors are aligned with the other city, not the one that it's being deployed in, like that will have a very different reaction. So it's really important, like, who's doing this, who's making these changes, who is doing the work of putting the preferences in for the interpretation of like, is it a bug or not? Basically, people will see, okay, it made a mistake, and they could interpret that as a bug in a well-meaning developer, or they could interpret that as a malicious thing that's trying to crush them. And it's the context is super important, and like who has legitimacy to make those changes. That's like a big part of the picture. But so then now we're talking about deception. That's you also have that with humans, right? You could have a deceptive developer who's saying that the product is for one thing, but really it's for indoctrinating you in something else. People will worry about that because surely things like that will exist. and people will be looking for them, right? Because they will expect, oh, I downloaded this app from some dodgy place. Maybe it's going to be trying to sell me something, or maybe it's trying to indoctrinate me, or and probably we'll get the usual kind of age gradient that we get with any kind of product. People fall for scams, that goes up with age and stuff, right? That's the sort of landscape we'll be in. There's also, you could ask about deception that's kind of de novo from the AI itself, which I think is maybe what you were asking about. I actually don't think it looks any different. I think, the society's response to it is the same, right? Maybe we have no idea, an app appears, we see an app on like the App Store. We don't know if a human wrote it or if an AI wrote it, and it kind of doesn't matter. It's just like, okay.
No, but if we're giving AI access to mission critical data and functionality, like in military, right? Or like in like corporation, like some sensitive data, then like stakes are higher, right? And the risk of deception is much higher. Then it's basically like decision, like, do we want to give AI access to military and like be more efficient and maybe like ahead of, like our like competitors, or like we were like concerned about the risks of deception and we sort of fall behind, and that's like really different.
Is still in the same framework that we have, right? Let's imagine you're some high up general or something like that, and you're trying to design an institution for how are the decisions going to be made around, launching nuclear weapons or something like that, right? And you say that, oh, there have to be this many decision makers in the room to decide, and you have to turn multiple keys and whatever, right? And you kind of try to make sure that the decision is not like left in the hands of any single individual human either. There's some kind of structure around it, right? And you probably have rules of liability and responsibility as well, right? People will you'll say like, oh, someone is reporting that, oh, I think we're being attacked, and they're the ones who is responsible for the that observation. Someone else is responsible for translating that into a plan of action. And there's some way of kind of overseeing that system. So you can say, okay, this is where responsibility is. You're responsible for this part, you're responsible for that part, and some aggregation around it, right? That's how we would do it for humans. So why should it be different for AI systems? Like, we wouldn't make it as a single, we might have different AI systems that are doing one thing in that system at a time. And then why should they talk to each other? We can make it so that they communicate in English with each other, and then you kind of regulate it the same way. And you say, okay, the problem, if there's a problem, it emerged in this spot, and you try to have redundancy, same as you would with a human institution, right? Because with a human institution, you have the same worry, right? One person might go rogue somewhere, so you make sure that there's redundancy.
In the case of AI is more powerful than human. Like, if one person like went rogue, it's not, the impact is different than like super intelligence AI went rogue, then impact is different.
It's many superintelligences in this picture, right? It's saying that, take this whatever institution we have for making some military decision now that has a bunch of humans in jobs, put a bunch of AIs in those but keep the same job structure. So maybe it'll run faster that way, but just make it so they're not all the same AI. There are a bunch of different AIs that are still forced to communicate with each other in a way that we can read as humans. Which is fine. Like, they can send strings of text to each other, and you then can still regulate it in the same way. You can still audit it in the same way. You can still it has the same kinds of requirements of transparency and that the humans would, and you can build in the same redundancy. You just make sure that they're different AIs that don't have like back channels to talk to each other.
That's the key point in this.
You could worry that there's some way that they could have a back channel established that you haven't seen, right? But that sounds like sounds like a normal crypto, the kind of stuff that the cryptographers work on, right? You can make sure that that's not possible somehow.
So I take it that your proposal is something like, I don't know, a society has a given set of thick concepts, and those are the things that the AI gets aligned upon. But one like important part of that picture is, people can be confronted with a thick concept of a different culture. And as a result of that confrontation, they change their mind. So like, I don't know, there was glasnost in the Soviet Union, and then people, realized that it wasn't a good form of government and so on. And I guess my worry with your proposal is that it seems to, on your account, AI can never prompt that kind of second order reflection, because if it's aligned on the values of the society that you're embedded in already, it would never prompt the kind of second order, like, are these values the best values in any kind of broader sense, because it's already aligned
Well,
on?
I guess I don't think that's true. And I think there's sort of a background of a pluralistic picture, right? People will use different apps that are made by different companies that will have different they'll get exposed to different things, and we should try to preserve that. So it's not just that it could be the case. One of the failure modes is like everything gets walled off from everything else. We just end up with a picture where every culture makes their own LLM, and no one ever is allowed to use a different culture's LLM. That's a failure mode, right? And there's maybe lots of reasons to think that they're forces moving in that direction, right? We want to avoid that kind of failure mode. We want a picture that's polycentric with overlapping authority, right? But not so I don't say like a decentralized picture, which is just which is ambiguous about that. Decentralized could mean like everyone is separate from each other and decentralized. Polycentric suggests that there is overlapping jurisdiction and you can kind of move around more.
So I guess I would be able to have access to, I don't know, some vastly different cultures model as well, and then compare the two or something in your ideal
I mean, that
world.
would be the ideal case, right?
Okay.
That's what we want to preserve, right? I mean, that's true right now, right? We want it to be the case that people can access like other cultures models, other developers' choices about what's appropriate to say or not. But at the same time, we want to have space for if there's some kind of community that wants to make rules for their members, saying like, my children can't ever use this kind of thing. We sort of do that. That is a move that is also deemed legitimate in this kind of space, right? So there has to be governance around that, obviously, because it seems like it could become bad. But if there's like a minority group that wants to maintain their culture, like they should have the ability to do that as well. And this is what government is for.
I guess I was just a little bit confused about why the AIs would be in a human-like values conflict at all, because if they're not having experiences and they don't have an idea of themselves in the world or opinions about what should be happening in the future or how they fit in with the larger society, then I don't see why they would be having sort of fundamental value disagreements with each other at all.
That's because people are putting in different objectives, right? Humans have the underlying
Sure.
disagreement, and then humans, program different goals into different AIs.
But can we just solve the problem by making sure we're properly regulating the humans that are...
Even developers don't understand how LLMs work. Like that's the black box. That's why they have interpretability team, safety team to figure out like why LLMs that they design like behave the way they behave, and they don't understand why they behave the way they behave. So you can regulate humans, but I'm not sure it will work because even humans don't understand.
Yeah,
Well, I'm saying both, that it doesn't matter, right? So okay, we think about it as the same way we regulate humans, and then sometimes the AIs will come up with things that are separate from what humans put in. You'll also have these things that will obviously happen, like a human sets up an agentic persistent system that has a way to sustain itself by making money, and it's running over time, and then the human dies or disappears or something, but the system's still running and it's still doing something. It still has some objective that it started with. So you get these kind of agentic things that are just out there with their goals doing something that can stop being so attached to any particular human goal. Maybe the human has disappeared, or maybe it's one of these cases that we were just talking about where it just kind of came up with something separately. But we don't need to think about like magical stuff where it's coming up with something like super unconnected, though it may also do that. It's just fine to think of like human goals where the human has disappeared and now it's just a goal that's like persisting beyond anyone's having wanted it. We kind of need to make sure that the system as a whole is robust to all these motivations. Like any motivation that can exist will exist.
Can AI develop consciousness? And do you think it's possible? Do you think we will see this in our lifetime?
So the way I would think about this is like other pragmatists, we would not really engage with that question, basically. Like we would say that that's a metaphysical question in a sense, right? It's a question about like what does it mean to be conscious, and then like what are the right criteria? If this set of criteria are satisfied, then a particular thing is conscious. Is where you'd have to go with that. We would really just not engage with that. We would say, what matters is how people use consciousness as a term, and how we talk about it, and how we care about it, and how we argue about it. And how we think that it has ethical implications, and those are kind of detached, right? It's kind of like my broad picture about conflict between, or disagreement between people, right? Some people are going to say it's one thing, some people are going to say it's another thing. Some people will say that they are conscious, or these particular ones are conscious. Other people will say that they're not, they can never be conscious. None of them can be conscious because it requires, biology or the spark of God or whatever. And all of these views will exist, right? And the only real question is, how can we live together? Because these are views that have very, people have very strong feelings about these views. It's like debates about abortion or something, right? It's very similar, right? So it could go, I don't know how it'll become, in what way it'll become polarized, but it seems like it very clearly could become polarized as something that is people have very strong feelings about, and we have to find ways to live together. So that's how I think about it. It's kind of irrelevant to the question of I just don't engage with the question of whether it is conscious or not. What clearly is the case is that people will disagree about this, and that's important.
If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the Buzzrobot YouTube channel and share what do you think how AI and humans can live together.